The ongoing war in Ukraine has become a focal point in international diplomacy of late, particularly with regard to the role of the United States when it comes to providing military and humanitarian aid. As of early 2025, the United States has allocated approximately $110 billion in emergency funding to Ukraine since the Russian invasion began in February 2022. Over $65 billion of that amount was designated specifically as military assistance. This substantial financial support has been critical for Ukraine's defense against Russia's aggression. But now, questions are looming about the future for Ukraine if American funding were to cease. If the United States were to halt its financial support, the implications for Ukraine could be dire. American aid constitutes more than half of all the military assistance received by Ukraine so far. That makes it an essential lifeline for Ukraine to sustain its military operations against Russia. The absence of this American support would likely lead to a significant weakening of Ukraine's defense forces, and that could potentially allow Russian forces to gain an upper hand and escalate their offensive as this war closes in on 3 years. So in the event of a US withdrawal from funding for Ukraine, the question then arises, can Europe rise up? Can Europe fill the gap when America retreats? European nations have collectively provided substantial aid to Ukraine. Again, it's over $100 billion, but that figure includes both military and humanitarian assistance from the various countries and institutions in Europe. Notably, the European response has often been hampered by internal divisions and varying levels of commitment among member states. Germany, for example, has been reluctant and less committed than France or other European nations. For instance, even in Hungary, which has been opposed to this war, the opposition there blocked a $52 billion financial support plan for the European Union, which was aimed at providing aid to Ukraine. Eventually, the government of Viktor Orban, even though it is against this war and is a big supporter of Putin and Russia, relented, but there was a lot of drama in the run-up to it. French President Emmanuel Macron, who's been leading the charge collectively on behalf of Europe against Russian aggression, is holding an emergency meeting to address this challenge. It indicates that Europe recognizes the urgency of maintaining continued support for Ukraine. However, whether European countries can match or exceed American contributions remains uncertain given their own internal political pressures as well as economic constraints. The political landscape is also further complicated by recent developments, which is following the key phone call that happened last week between Donald Trump, the President of the United States, and Vladimir Putin, the President of Russia. It's the first time both leaders have spoken in many, many years, and certainly the first time they've spoken since this war in Ukraine began 3 years ago. Following that phone call last week between Trump and Putin, speculation has now risen regarding a potential meeting between Putin and Trump as early as later this month in Saudi Arabia. In fact, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and General Kellogg, who's been nominated by Trump as a special envoy to try and end this war, are meeting with their Russian interlocutors later this week in Saudi Arabia. Trump's position on Ukraine has been clear. He advocates for negotiating peace with Russia, and that could involve concessions which may not necessarily align with what Ukraine wants.
We're moving along. We're trying to get a peace with Russia, Ukraine, and we're working very hard on it. It's a war that should have never started.
Do you expect Zelensky to be involved in these conversations? What will his role be?
I do. He will be involved, yes.
And to try and step into this void, British Labour Prime Minister Keir Starmer has also indicated that the UK is prepared to send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine if necessary. This move suggests a willingness among some European leaders to, at least on the face of it, be seen as increasing their commitment to Ukraine's defense. But it does raise some serious questions about the long-term sustainability of aiding Ukraine and helping Ukraine with both military and humanitarian assistance without robust American support.
But nobody wants the conflict to continue, and Ukrainians, more than anybody, want the conflict to end. But we must make sure that Ukraine is at the heart of this, and there can't be any negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine being at the heart of it.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has made it clear that Ukraine will not accept any peace deal that does not involve his country's direct participation. He wants to be in the room when Trump and Putin meet. He's also emphasized that territorial integrity is non-negotiable. He also insists either on NATO membership at a future date or at least NATO security guarantees as a prerequisite for any kind of settlement with Russia. None of this is part of the American plan, which is likely to be agreed upon by Russia when the leaders of both countries, that is President Trump and President Putin, meet later this month in Saudi Arabia. This hardline stand reflects a broader consensus among Ukrainian leadership that ceding any territory to Russia would undermine Ukraine's national sovereignty, and it would only further embolden more Russian aggression in the future.
I will meet with Russians, with only one Russian guy, with Putin, only after we will have common plan with Trump, Europe, and we will sit with Putin and stop the war. Only in this case I'm ready to meet, not in other compromises platforms.
So the sticking points in these negotiations include: one, territorial integrity, which Ukraine insists that it should retain control over all its territories, including the 20% or so in the eastern part of the country that's been taken over by Russia since this war began. Ukraine has also been talking about the return of Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014, none of which is a go area as far as Putin is concerned. Then there is NATO membership, the demand for NATO membership or equivalent security guarantees from the 30-member North Atlantic military alliance. That Zelensky and the Ukrainians say is also another condition if they need to come to the negotiating table. And the most important one is that they want to counter any future possibilities of Russian aggression, much like what we saw in 2014 and much like what we saw beginning 2022, which has led to this current ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. So any agreement reached without these three conditions, Ukraine and Zelensky feel, would only embolden Russia, and it would lead to future conflicts. So the future trajectory of the war in Europe hinges significantly on whether Europe can carry on and sustain its commitment to Ukraine without any American backing. Analysts suggest that while some European countries may be able to step up their contributions, they are unlikely to match the scale or even the immediacy of American support. The risk is that without consistent funding and particularly military aid from the United States, Ukraine may find itself unable to maintain its current defensive and offensive posture against Russia. Moreover, if Trump were to follow through on his promise to negotiate with Russia, meet Putin and find that elusive peace deal, there could be immense pressure on Ukraine to acquiesce in terms unfavorable to its sovereignty. This scenario does raise concerns about whether European leaders would be willing to or even able to oppose such a dramatic shift in US policy. The question is, can Emmanuel Macron be a modern-day Charles de Gaulle and stand up to Donald Trump? In fact, Ukraine's very future, and the very future of continental Europe in a sense, hangs in the balance.